What's the deal with them Condottiero bros? The Condottiero is a heavy melee infantry unit available to the Knights Templar civilization in the Imperial Age. It comes with the Republic of Venice commandery and is the least picked landmark option by a fairly large margin. However, I think that is due to some very strong competition at that stage. Their pick rate has actually gone up quite a bit as they've gotten a number of quite substantial buffs since their release. So if you've tried them in the past and found them lacking, it might be worth giving them another shot. Looking at the Condottiero stats, they seem like a better man-at-arms at first glance as they have higher attack and higher damage as well as more HP. They only have about half the armor of the man-at-arms though, which will turn out to be very relevant in my opinion. From here they only get weirder or more special compared to what we're used to from units of this type, as they seem to get bonus stats that are more like that of the Horsemen. For example, they have a movement speed of 1.44 tiles per second, which is not as fast as a Horseman, but it does make them the second fastest infantry unit in the game, I think, despite being classed as heavy. They also get bonus damage similar to that of a Horseman, and that they deal bonus damage to siege as well as gunpowder units, which stack up to an insane of 48 damage with 0 upgrades against gunpowder siege units. If we include the Feudal Age commandery of the Principality of Antioch, all blacksmith upgrades, and elite army tactics, all of which I recommend with this guy, their base damage against any unit type goes up to 24, which can still be increased by the Fanaticism upgrade if they are at low HP. On top of all of this, they have another thing unusual about them. They have a permanent passive ability that reduces all gunpowder base damage to them by a whopping 50%, which can make them insanely tanky against those kinds of units. Their cost, 120 gold, and nothing else, is also rather weird as they are basically the only non-monk unit in the game that only costs gold. 120 gold means their overall cost is pretty low compared to that of a lot of other endgame units, as they are only 10 res more expensive than man-at-arms. The problem, of course, is that it can be tricky to get the insane amount of pure gold that is necessary to spam these guys. The Republic of Venice comes with other bonuses that help out with this, as they allow you to build 5 quite busted traders that give you tons of gold as well as better resource trading at the market. The most effective way of spamming them, however, remains just having almost all of your villagers on gold with all mining upgrades researched, which of course is only possible for as long as there's gold available on the map. Depending on the map or in long games, there might just not be any more gold, which makes it almost impossible to go for a gold-only army. Fun fact! I think their cause is actually a reference to the history, as the Condottieros did not fight for any one nation, but rather were mercenaries that fought for the highest bidder. They are named after these condotta or mercenary contracts that they signed with, for example, the city of Venice to fight for them for money. This being reflected in the game, with them only costing gold and nothing else, is not only a cool hint at their history, but also influences their gameplay in a pretty unique way. In today's video, we're gonna look at how they fare in combat against most other elite units, so that we can get a feel for what they can do and can get better at estimating their strength in an actual game of AU4. Since we are talking only Imperial Age for this video, all tests will include all university upgrades for all units, but no specific ones unless stated otherwise. I also forgot the Fanaticism upgrade for the tests against generic units, even though you should definitely get that upgrade every time you can. It's really good. So no Fanaticism, but let me spoil this much. The Condottieros actually did pretty damn well even without it. So let's get into it and see how weird they can get. In this matchup, man-at-arms have higher melee armor, while the Condottieros have the advantage when it comes to like damage per attack. These two things cancel each other out almost exactly. This leaves the Condottieros in an advantageous position as they have higher HP and also an increased attack speed. The fight does take a while since both units are quite tanky, but in the end the Condottieros win quite convincingly. Horsemen. The other unit we compared the Condottiero to was the Horsemen, so let's look at them next. Horsemen are not meant to counter heavy infantry, so I put them at a resource advantage here to test the limits of the Condottieros. At the bottom we can also see the same number of men-at-arms going up against the Horsemen to compare their performance. As one might expect, the Horsemen get killed pretty fast by the Condottieros as they have higher damage than the men-at-arms. Looking at the final result, however, the man-at-arms do have slightly more HP left over in the end, so they technically did better even at a slightly lower res cost, but they took longer to get there. This is also one of the matchups that were run without the Fanaticism upgrade, which would have probably given the Condottieros the edge compared to the man-at-arms, but it would also cost about 1,000 resources extra, so maybe it would have been an unfair advantage. Spearmen. Spearmen, like Horsemen, don't cost any gold, so in the late game they tend to be used as arrow fodder in the front line to buy time for the actual damage dealers in the back, which are, for example, Crossbows, Handcannons, or maybe Siege Weapons. This makes this both a relevant and an irrelevant matchup at the same time, as the Condottiero are very likely to be going up against Spearmen, but at the same time, it's not really the Spearmen that you should be worried about. In the end, the Condottiero again performs slightly worse than the Man-at-Arms, which was a little bit weird to me, or at least unexpected. I guess I kinda just underestimated the value of high melee armor when fighting these trash units. Knights. Normally, knights would be considered a counter to heavy infantry, or at least to men-at-arms. We're about to see this here as well, as the men-at-arms actually get demolished by the knights. However, when it comes to the Condottiero, the matchup actually gets flipped on its head. Not only do they do better, but they actually win the fight at even resources, which means the knights should not be considered a straight-up counter to the Condottieros, which is not something that I would have expected. The Condottiero has fast movement speed already makes them great at attacking the enemy eco when their army's away, and this matchup against the knights doubles down on this because it shows that the raiding with the Condottieros can't be shut down by knights anywhere near as easily as I would have thought. Ranged units. Testing ranged units in the manner we've done here is always a little tricky. I've gotten a couple of comments in the past saying that AoE 4 is dumb, or that I'm dumb for saying that crossbows counter man-at-arms, when in the test the unmicroed crossbows die to the man-at-arms attacking them. The overwhelming number of people that watch my videos understand why those comments are wrong, but I did want to mention it once explicitly. Ranged units need to be microed well to show their full potential, but what exactly well means varies drastically depending on the skill level of the players and also the situation that you're in game. And I cannot test for every situation or skill level really. So for the following tests, we'll look at two scenarios. One without any macro to establish a baseline, and one where the ranged units infinitely kite backwards, stutter stepping, in order to give us an impression of both scenarios. Let's get into it. Archers. Based on the TED talk I just gave you can probably predict how this one's gonna go. Archers don't deal bonus damage to heavy infantry, so they have a hard time killing the Condottieros, who can close the distance pretty quickly thanks to their high movement speed. They then cut down the archers pretty quickly, even without the fanaticism. At the bottom we see a comparison to men-at-arms, who again do better than the Condottieros thanks to their superior ranged armor. This comparison shows again that when it comes to fighting the so-called trash units, aka units that don't cost gold, the men-at-arms are actually better at even resources. As promised, I redid this test with the archers kiting backwards, and I anticipated this to go better for the Condottieros as they have increased movement speed and therefore, I assumed would be better at chasing down the archers. However, the archers actually benefit from the kiting so much that their number of attacks that they get off before dying is way increased. This means that the man-at-arms armor is actually more of a factor than the increased movement speed of the Condottieros. Therefore, the man-at-arms, despite being slower, are better at chasing down archers than the Condottieros. Which is super weird, right? That's never something I would have expected. The man-at-arms are better at chasing. What? But that's what the test shows, clearly. So archers are kind of a soft counter to Condottieros, or at least more so than to man-at-arms. Crossbows. The number one true counter to the Condottiero that is broadly available, of course, is the crossbow. Its bonus damage hits hard and kills both the man-at-arms and the Condottieros pretty quickly. Without micro, the Condottieros still beat the crossbows here, while at a serious resource disadvantage. The man-at-arms die super fast. This shows again that the Condottieros are way better against gold-based units. In fact, it seems like they get more cost efficient the more gold the enemy unit costs. I redid the test while kiting backwards the crossbows, and here again the Condottieros did better than the man-at-arms. Quite a bit better actually, because the crossbow damage output is so high that the man-at-arms die almost before getting into range at all. So here the movement speed does seem to be much more of an advantage, just because the fight is happening so much faster and the armor is much less of a factor due to the high damage of the crossbows. Handcannons. I almost don't need to talk about this one. It's probably the first unit you thought of when you first heard about the Condottieros, and it's an even bigger slaughter than I thought it would be. Handcannons cost twice as much as a Condottiero, and the max I could push it to was this 5 versus 11 here. This one gets close, but at a 5 versus 11, it also means that the handcannon side has more than 4 times as many resources as the Condottieros, and in the end they still lose. Like, that's insane. That's the biggest resource imbalance that I've had on my channel, I think, since that video I made about the villager fighting 20 rams. Also, just for fun, here's the man-at-arms trying to do the same thing. Yeah, nowhere close. Mangonels. Mangonels deal bonus damage to range units, and those range units have significantly less max HP than the average melee unit. This means the Mangonels are not normally used to counter melee units, so it's not surprising that both of these units die pretty slowly here. Man-at-Arms take slightly more damage, but the difference isn't huge. I really only included this matchup because of Nest of Bees. The Nest of Bees are a gunpowder siege unit that is the replacement for the Mangonel in Chinese Civ. They also deal bonus damage to range units, however this bonus damage makes up a smaller part of their overall damage output, making them better against non-ranged units. This means if you're playing China and you're in a pinch, you can use these against melee units and still do pretty well normally. Unless those melee units are Condottiero, which of course also don't take bonus damage from them, and their damage is cut in half by the passive ability. Springalds. Springalds are great against melee infantry. They deal bonus damage to them, their attacks pierce, which allows them to potentially hit loads of targets at once, and they have quite a bit of melee armor, which can make it hard for melee units to destroy them, even if they do get into range. Unlike Mangonels, they have no minimum range requirement, allowing them to fire point blank at units right in front of them. They are still squishy enough that they need some sort of buffer between themselves and the enemy, so for this test, I put some man-at-arms in front of them just to make it more realistic. With this setup, the Springalds just barely win against the man-at-arms, however the Condottieros do better here as they cut through the buffer units faster and then deal bonus damage to the Springalds, which really helps against the melee armor. The anti-melee nature still makes them what I would consider to be a counter to the Condottieros, although clearly to a lesser extent compared to most other melee units. Ribauldequins. The next unit to test after this Springalds was of course the Ribauldequin. I expected similar results here as we've seen from the Nest of Bees, however, with the same setup as the Springalds test, the units died so fast that I couldn't make out if there was a difference between the man-at-arms and Condottieros. I thought the Ribauldequin would also deal damage in a line in front of them, so I set up lines of units on hold position to test the difference between the Condottieros and man-at-arms. But then when I attacked with the Ribauldequin, this happened. Unlike with the Springalds, the units right in front of them took no damage, and only the last two units got hit, but also that inconsistently. When I redid the same thing against Condottieros, there didn't seem to be much of a difference, which really confused me and led me to one simple realization. I have no idea how Ribauldequins work. Put the first video on pause, we're doing a sub video, y'all. What's the deal with them Ribaulde bros? The Ribauldequin is ranged units available to these civs in the Imperial Age. They're expensive as hell and they deal 12 times 42 range damage per attack. I thought they deal damage in a straight line like a Springald, but that's not actually the case. Their damage pattern is more like that of the Mangonel. However, their damage is much higher and the projectiles cannot be dodged. They don't deal any bonus damage to anything and therefore are not buffed by chemistry. Their damage type is actually not siege, as you might think, but range damage. Why? Because if they attack a building, the building's 50 ranged armor reduces the damage from 42 times 12 to 1 times 12. If they dealt siege damage, the ranged armor would be ignored and they would deal 500 damage per attack, which would put them in the same damage category as Bombards. Ribauldequins are generally considered counter to mass melee units, as those tend to bunch up a lot, which allows the splash damage to hit extra hard. Ribauldequins like Springalds are countered by any kind of ranged units, as their ranged armor is much lower than that of most other siege weapons, so they can be sniped from afar pretty easily. Scatter formation is also very effective to help reduce the splash damage. Thanks for watching the sub video, back to the main one. So, do Condottiero counter Ribauldequins because they are gunpowder and siege weapons? Nope. The damage output of the Ribauldequin is simply too high. Being able to just barely withstand one attack is not enough. That being said, if you do get the Condottieros into range of the Ribauldequin, they kill them much faster than, for example, Man-at-Arms, as they deal about 40 damage per attack instead of like 4. Hot tip, get maximum ranged armor at the blacksmith, for as the +3 from those upgrades actually helps the Condottieros to reliably survive the first attack of a Ribauldequin. Their maximum total of 6 ranged armor reduces the damage from 42 per projectile to 36 per projectile, which leads to a total of 432 damage, which is then cut in half by their passive ability, which means the Condottieros only take 216 damage. At maximum HP, they will always survive this if they have elite army tactics. Unless sometimes, where some of the secondary targets die anyway. It's never the main one. I have no idea how this works. I don't know. It seems random and confuses me. I played around this for like an hour and I still don't know what might cause it. Generally, if someone from the modding community can look at the game's code and tell me how the damage of the Ribauldequins work, I'd love to know. Please leave a comment, I'll pin it for everyone to see. Alright, enough of that. Next unit. Great Bombards. Great Bombards are a gunpowder siege weapon that is exclusive to the Ottomans. They are very expensive and deal a lot of damage to buildings and other siege units. But unlike regular Bombards, they are also good against infantry, as they deal about 100 bonus damage to them, which splashes to some degree to the units around the primary target. Here, the damage reduction of the Condottiero's passive ability is very effective, allowing them to survive even if they are the primary target of the Great Bombard. The splash damage is also greatly reduced, and just as with Ribauldequins, when the Condottieros manage to get up close to the Great Bombers, they kill them incredibly fast. Combine this with the fact that most Ottoman players really like going for lots of Janissaries rather than crossbows in the Castle Age, and you get a unit composition that is a dream come true for Condottieros. The Sengoku Daimyo is another Sith that can fall into this trap, as their crossbows are replaced with the Tanegashima Tate, which is an early version of the Handcannoneer that deals bonus damage to heavy units. Both of these Siths would be wise to use crossbows rather than their version of the Handcannoneer, given how hard they are countered by Condottieros. Well, I guess Sengoku can't go crossbows as they don't have any. So what units should they go for? Condottieros versus Sengoku Daimyo. Testing units from the Sengoku Daimyo is always extra tricky because of their clan mechanic. If you don't know, they can build these clan estates which unlock upgrades, but it's always for specific units. Also, these clan estates are like really expensive, so you kind of by default giving them an unfair advantage just because you have to give them the clan estates in order to like unlock their full fighting force, but that's a huge resource disadvantage for any opponent immediately. For these tests, I decided to give the Sengoku side all of their upgrades as well as the Sword Hunt statue and level 3 clan for the appropriate unit. I also included the level 4 melee damage upgrade that is Sith specific to Japanese Siths, as well as of course all the university upgrades. To make it fair, the Condottieros get the Principality of Antioch as well as Fanaticism to like try and kinda balance it out. That makes the upgrade for the Knights Templar side still way cheaper than for Sengoku, but at least it's something. Up until recently, the Mounted Samurai was the unit to go for with Sengoku, usually combined with Uni to punish spears and crossbows from the opponent. My initial thought was that the Mounted Samurai might do well, but then I remembered how the Condottieros did beat the Knights. Unsurprisingly, the Condottieros won that matchup. Also briefly tested the Kanabo Samurai, although I did not get my hopes up there, if I'm being honest. The biggest contender would be the Naginata Samurai, aka their replacement for the Man-at-Arms. Man-at-Arms didn't do too terribly against the Condottieros, as they are one of the units that got buffed in the most recent round of patches. I found it tricky to test this accurately, as the daimyo that is needed to boost their attack speed is hard to account for. For this test I decided to keep it nearby to apply the buff but not let it fight. And as you can see, the Naginata Samurai do quite well here. They not only win, but they have about 30% of the HP left, which isn't bad, but it's not exactly a complete stomp either if we consider how much I tried to maximize the advantage for the Sengoku side. I wanted to test this again in a way that accounts for the cost of the daimyo, so I decided to remove one of the samurai and replace it with the daimyo. This gives the Sengoku Daimyo an advantage in terms of res, but at the same time it's probably closer to a real game. Here the Samurai win again, although it's a lot closer now with only about 10% left over. But at least it's a win, you know? So I guess this is the best shot you got in the late game as Sengoku. Max out Hojo clan and get Samurais going. I tried to confirm this from pro replays, but I couldn't find any good example, which I guess could also tell us something. It might just be the best strategy to never go for the Imperial Age when playing as Sengoku against Knights Templar. Most Siths already don't want to go up against Knights Templar in the Imperial Age, as the infinite gold from the Pilgrims can be extremely hard to beat. For Sengoku this might just be doubly true and tell us that it's a good idea to try and end the game in Castle if at all possible. Or at least, you know, only go Imp if you're far ahead and cannot mask the opponent. Now, before we conclude the video, there's also one important thing that works against the Condottieros that we gotta talk about, as it's a major downside to these units, at least when comparing them to other Imperial Age level commanderies, but also when comparing them to Mounted Samurai. Population efficiency. Population efficiency or resource density are terms that get used a lot when analyzing units, but I think it's particularly important when it comes to the Condottiero. Their low pop efficiency is probably their biggest drawback when it comes to using them in late game. If you don't know what that means exactly, I'm gonna give a short demonstration here. First we look at the Slachter cavalry going up against the Condottieros. The Slachter are pretty expensive, so there's only 2 of them going up against 5 of the Condottieros. And as we've seen, the heavy cavalry will lose this fight here again. This fight may have been even in resources, but not in population, which seems irrelevant at first glance. For most of the game, you can just build more houses, and those are pretty inexpensive. In the late game, however, your eco should be pretty strong, so that most of the 200 population that you do have available ends up being used up by villagers. If we assume that you and your opponent have around 120 villagers each, which is around the number that a lot of people would stop at, you are left with 80 total population for the military. That 80 population can fit a lot more resources worth of Slachter cavalry than it can Condottieros. If we repeat the fight again with the 80 population restriction in mind, but put up 80 Slachter cavalry against 80 Condottieros with another 120 Condottieros in queue, the fight would technically still be even in resources, but the Slachter gain an advantage here as all of their fighting force is on the battlefield all at once. The 80 Condottieros start the fight while most of the units that make up their side are still in queue. This gives the Slachter a huge advantage and is one of the reasons why they are still very popular among high-level players. You can see how fast these Condottieros are dying, and in the end the Slachter managed to win the matchup that they had previously lost. Even though I screwed up the math here and queued up an additional 200 Condottieros rather than the 120 that would have made it even resources. Even against this resource disadvantage, the Slachter win quite easily because they are more pop efficient. How do you play around this when you want to use Condottieros anyway? The easiest and most important way would be to simply attack the opponent just before you hit max population. That way your opponent will not have time to mass up an army of expensive units and the pop inefficiency will not be relevant yet. You can also fan out and harass different spots on the map, as this is likely to lose you some Condottieros but allows you to fight in smaller groups and trade away some of those units for eco damage, while avoiding the big head-on fight. Any lost Condottieros should be easy to replace as they are relatively cheap. On top of this, you can spend resources on other things that make sense that don't take up population space, such as fortresses or other static defenses to increase your income and fighting power. Or just get upgrades that make sense for your units and economy. The important part is to do something, anything to prevent your resources from just piling up in the bank needlessly or in the queue of the barracks without actually producing units. Conclusion. The Condottieros are a jack-of-all-trades kind of unit. They do well in fight, while raiding, can chase down enemies and retreat pretty effectively. They are a little worse than you'd think against archers, spears and horsemen, but quite a bit better against anything that costs gold. Their unique ability and bonus damage make them busted against almost anything that has gunpowder in its name, and they are really only countered by crossbows, which may not be available depending on the enemy's choice of civ. Also, Ribauldequins are weird. Sengoku should probably go Hojo clan against KT and subscribe to Trash Can Incorporated. We are always looking for entrants. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye bye.